Hello and welcome back to Indus News with me, Osman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's in the United States, where the House of Representatives is convening its first public hearing in 20 years into President Donald Trump's impeachment inquiry. Trump is accused of pressuring Ukraine to launch an investigation against his political rival Joe Biden and his son. US diplomat Bill Taylor and State Department official George Kent will testify together before the House Intelligence Committee. The diplomats have already met with the committees conducting the inquiry behind closed doors last month. Democrats said they've had enough material to move forward with the public impeachment hearings, while Trump has already called the probe the greatest witch hunt in American history. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has arrived in Washington for a two-day visit to meet US President Donald Trump. Erdogan says Turkey's military operation in northern Syria will be top of the meeting's agenda. Ahead of his visit, Erdogan accused Washington of not fulfilling its commitment of removing Kurdish forces from Turkey's border with Syria. Meanwhile, Trump has not shown any intention of ending Washington's alliance with the SDF. Last month, Trump withdrew US troops from northeast Syria, parting ways with Kurdish forces. However, the US later joined forces with the SDF to guard Syrian oil installations from falling into the hands of ISIS. I'm joined by our correspondent Harry Horton from Washington. Harry, thank you for joining us here on Indus News. So tell us, look, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visit comes a month after Ankara's military offensive in northeast Syria. Can he convince President Donald Trump to abandon the US relationship with the YPG and the SDF, as that seems the main sticking point between the two countries?
It's fair to say that the US-Turkey relationship is at its lowest point in decades, and it's just that personal bond, really, between President Trump and President Erdogan that's keeping things together somewhat. That point of whether or not the US will abandon its allies, the SDF, YPG, in northeastern Syria, I think that's pretty unlikely. A senior White House official speaking to reporters just a few hours ago said that there is no intention for that cooperation to end. The president has had very public communications with the head of the SDF, General Mazloum. So President Erdogan, I'm sure, will come here and try and pressure President Trump to back away from its alliance with the Kurds in northeastern Syria. But as far as the White House is concerned, that alliance, although it is not quite at the level it was some months ago, it does remain, and I think the priority is for the United States to keep that alliance in place for the months ahead.
All right, Harry, last month US Congress passed a sanctions package against Turkey over its Syria operation. Do you think President Erdogan and Trump can work out a way to evade further sanctions on the country?
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult because there's a whole range of different issues, as I say, that the US and Turkey are at odds over. One of the biggest ones is the Russian S-400 missile defense system. Turkey has spent billions and billions of dollars purchasing this Russian missile defense system. That's really angered lawmakers here in Washington, D.C. So the US is trying to get Turkey to back away from that system it's just invested in. That's a very difficult thing for the US to do, but one senior White House official said recently that if Turkey doesn't do that, then it's inevitable that Turkey will be hit with further economic sanctions. So that's something that could be coming down the line in the weeks ahead. Other issues where there's huge disagreements, as we've just talked about, the not just the US alliance with the SDF and the YPG, but the overall strategy that the US has for Syria going forward. Very different to what Turkey wants to happen with Syria in the future. Big disagreements as well on human rights in Turkey as well. Lots of US lawmakers putting pressure on President Trump to do more to try and protect human rights within Turkey. So huge areas of disagreement here. The White House have been playing dead playing down expectations over the past few days that we could see any sort of a big deal or big announcement come out of this meeting between President Erdogan and President Trump. The White House trying to say, look, this is just about diplomacy, this is trying to smooth things over somewhat, and then perhaps in the weeks and months ahead, the two countries might be able to thrash out some more concrete agreements. So look, the relationship in a very bad place going into this meeting between President Trump and President Erdogan, and I think really both countries hoping they can come out with a slightly calmer tone between the two countries and then try and resolve those bigger issues going forward.
Harry, thank you. That was our correspondent in Washington, Harry Horton, there joining us in Indus News. Now, in other news, in Yemen, a Houthi missile attack on a military base killed 7 soldiers in the northern Marib province. The attack was launched during Defense Minister Mohammed al-Makdishi's visit to the compound. The base is the main military facility overseeing a ground operation to recapture the capital, Sana'a. It's situated 120 kilometers west of the Marib province. On the Gaza Strip, 8 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. Palestine's health ministry says in the last 24 hours, the Israeli army have killed 22 Palestinians. Witnesses say Tel Aviv has started deploying more troops along the Gaza border. The Palestinian government, in a statement, said since Tuesday, Israel hit Gaza with 22 airstrikes and 10 artillery shells. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh has told Israel to immediately stop its aggression against Gaza. In Kabul, 12 people have been killed and 20 others wounded in a car bomb explosion near the Interior Ministry. The Interior Ministry spokesperson Nasrat Rahimi says the blast occurred in Kabul's Kasaba area. Rahimi said the targeted area has not yet been cleared, but no one has claimed responsibility for the attack yet. Recounting votes in the Afghan presidential election has been stopped across the country. The preliminary results that had been due tomorrow have been further delayed. The Election Commission spokesman Aziz Ahmed Ibrahimi said the process has been stopped to address complaints by candidates. Ibrahimi said issues in the recounting process at 8,000 polling stations means the final result must be delayed. 10 out of 18 presidential candidates, including Chief Executive Abdullah, have boycotted the recount. They've demanded the removal of fraudulent votes before any further with the elections. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the country's economy is slowly but steadily getting stronger. Speaking at a CPEC project ceremony in Islamabad, Khan said the World Bank, IMF and the ADB have recognized Pakistan's progress. The Prime Minister said the rupee gained strength in the last 3 months, which is a good sign for the country's economy. He said the government is trying to reduce trade deficit as this is the only way forward. Khan went on to say that Pakistan's ease of doing business jumped 28 points, highlighting the government's fiscal performance. The president of Azad Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan, has warned that the threat of a war between India and Pakistan is looming over South Asia. More in this report.
Addressing the Magla dialogue in Islamabad, Khan said India's illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir is unacceptable to Pakistan and the people of Kashmir.
If diplomacy is not initiated, Kashmiris will be forced and pushed to armed resistance. Although right now I can tell you that the majority of the Kashmiris are unarmed.
Speaking at the event, Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesperson Mohammad Faisal said Kashmiri's right to self-determination is sacred and non-negotiable for Islamabad. He said India is trying to establish its hegemony over South Asia.
It is a very dangerous trend because the state is trying to saffronize or Hinduize the entire setup in India. And sane voices within India are questioning whatever the Indian state is doing. It is a very, very serious thing, not just for Pakistan, also the Muslim minority in India and other minorities.
Faisal said the BJP administration in New Delhi is serving as a platform for the extremist Hindutva ideology. Isa Naqvi, Indus News, Islamabad.
As the crisis in Kashmir continues, Hurriyat Conference Party leader Saeed Ali Gilani has thanked Pakistan for bringing global attention to the crisis in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a letter to Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, Gilani said this may be his last public statement because of his poor health. Gilani said Imran Khan's speech at the United Nations General Assembly for the oppressed people of occupied Kashmir was praiseworthy. He said the Indian Army were using rape and sexual violence as a weapon against Kashmiris. He said Indian troops are now trying to capture land from Kashmiris. Gilani said the Muslims of Ladakh have been targeted by Indian forces because they rejected New Delhi's annexation of the valley. He urged Prime Minister Khan to take action and end all diplomatic ties with India after its illegal actions. Well, India has denied internet access to international journalists reporting from occupied Kashmir, further gagging them from reporting on the ground. Authorities banned freelancers and web journalists from the Srinagar Media Centre. The media centre is the only place where journalists have internet access amid a communications blackout in the valley. Journalists say they have to stand for hours to queue up for a chance to file their stories via the web. Yesterday, journalists held a protest against the Indian-imposed clampdown and communications blackout, which has been in effect for the past 100 days. Well, in Washington, the U.S. Congress is set to hold a hearing on the crisis in Indian-occupied Kashmir tomorrow. In a statement, the Tom Lantis Human Rights Commission said there are persistent reports of human rights violations in the valley. The Commission expressed concern at the excessive use of force by occupation forces, the communications blackout, and the illegal arrests of Kashmiri politicians. It said witnesses will testify about the situation and will offer recommendations for action by Congress. The witnesses will include human rights activist Arjun Sethi, Seela Ashai, and Human Rights Watch official John Sifton. The hearing will be hosted by Congressman James McGovern and Christopher Smith. In Pakistan, the government has granted conditional approval to let ailing former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif go abroad for 4 weeks for medical treatment. Minister of Law and Justice Farooq Naseem said Sharif must submit indemnity bonds worth 7 billion rupees to travel to the UK. The cabinet meeting, chaired by Prime Minister Khan, approved the removal of Sharif's name from the exit control list. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Welcome back. Now in Lebanon, a man has been shot dead and another injured in the capital Beirut after the army fired live rounds to break up an anti-corruption protest. This is the second death during nationwide unrest about the government that has largely been peaceful. The army says it arrested a soldier who opened fire at demonstrators in the coastal town of Khalde. The Wali Jumblat-led Progressive Socialist Party said the victim is one of its members, but urged supporters to stay calm. The UN has urged Lebanon to speed up the formation of a new government. Hong Kong's police say the island city is on the brink of a total breakdown. They say protesters are committing what they call insane acts. Authorities say rioters have set up roadblocks and are damaging public transport facilities. The Education Bureau has shut down schools amid growing safety concerns. Announcing the suspension, Hong Kong's Education Bureau urged the protesters to stop the violence. But anti-government protesters have pledged to stick with their new strategy of weekday violence. The hospital authority says 81 people have been injured in the last 24 hours alone. And in the last 3 days, the city has witnessed its worst violence since the protests began 5 months ago. In Bolivia, clashes have broken out in the streets of the capital La Paz after Senate opposition leader Janine Áñez declared herself interim president. Bolivia's Attorney General's office says 7 people have been killed in the violence. Following President Evo Morales' resignation and exile, angry supporters surrounded the Congress building, calling for the new interim president, Anez, to quit. The government has pledged to punish those responsible for the civilian killings. It also urged Bolivians to return to normality after the endorsement of the Senator Anez's presidency by Bolivia's Constitutional Court. In Spain, police have dispersed 200 Catalan separatist protesters in the northeastern province of Girona. Access to the region's major AP7 highway was blocked for over 2 days. A secretive protest group called the Democratic Tsunami claimed responsibility for the disruption of major traffic roads in Catalonia. Separatist parties in the regional Catalan parliament defied a warning of legal consequences from Spain's court. Earlier, the French police detained 18 Catalan protesters who blocked a major border crossing between Spain and France for several hours. In Indonesia, a university student has blown himself up outside a police headquarters in the city of Medan. Police say 6 people were injured in the blast. Investigators say 5 police officers and a civilian were injured. A police spokesman says the student was a lone wolf suicide bomber and said authorities are investigating whether the bomber had links to any militant groups. Indonesia's anti-terrorism squad is working with the police to investigate the matter further. 13 people have been killed and 20 others injured when a truck and passenger bus collided in western Slovakia. Rescue officials say the accident occurred in the city of Nitra, some 100 kilometers east of the capital Bratislava. Police say the number of casualties could rise. In a social media post, Prime Minister Peter Pellegrini expressed his condolences to the victims' families. In northern Peru, 19 people have died and 25 injured when a bus plunged into a ravine. Police say the gorge was almost 300 meters deep. According to police, the tragedy was probably caused by thick fog in the area. They say the bus was traveling from the town of Calanca to Trujillo. Peru's highways are prone to accidents because of weather conditions in the Andes Mountains. Now in India, pollution is getting out of control in New Delhi as the air quality index has now entered into the severe plus category. The Central Pollution Control Board has declared an emergency. New Delhi is one of the worst cities in the world for pollution. More in this report.
People are suffering from respiratory diseases as a thick blanket of smog continues to engulf the Indian capital. New Delhi and its adjoining cities have been grappling with their worst ever pollution crisis. Residents are complaining of runny eyes, a persistent cough, and dull headaches that last all day.
There is a lot of trouble. Eyes burning and even walking is difficult these days. There is a long-term loss of health with it.
Absent winds are said to be one of the reasons for the increasing pollution over the last 2 days, other than stubble burning. Particulate matter levels have been recorded at 500, nearly 5 times the healthy limit. A Delhi resident said breathing felt forced.
When we breathe, it feels like forced breathing. So we have to get out wearing masks in both mornings and evenings.
Air quality in the hazardous or equivalent category may provoke respiratory issues that can affect even healthy individuals.
It feels dizzy and nauseating. Children and elderly are especially having respiratory issues. Infections are also coming forward with the pollution.
The air quality in India's capital is expected to deteriorate further in the coming days.
In Australia, more than 70 wildfires are still burning across New South Wales and 61 in Queensland. Conditions have eased from the catastrophic danger ratings in New South Wales, but the condition in Queensland is getting worse. More in this report.
The hot, dry continent of Australia has long experience with bushfires. But scientists say climate change is magnifying extreme weather conditions. The threat in New South Wales has been downgraded from catastrophic, but officials urge residents to remain vigilant. 21 people have been injured in New South Wales. 13 of these are firefighters. Officials say 50 houses have been destroyed or damaged in the state. At one point, fires broke out in the suburbs of Sydney. Further north, Queensland is expected to face dangerous wind changes today. 14 homes have been destroyed, 13 in the Cobra Ball fire near Yeppoon. Meanwhile, the waterbombing helicopter crashed in the northern state. The Queensland Ambulance Service is calling it a heavy landing and says the pilot has minor injuries.
The British Prime Minister has announced more support for communities affected by flooding in northern England. 100 army personnel will be deployed to support recovery efforts in South Yorkshire. Boris Johnson made the commitment following a meeting of the government's Emergency Cobra Committee. Johnson faced criticism from the Labour and the Liberal Democrats parties, who said he should have declared a national emergency. Over a month's worth of rain fell on parts of northern England in less than 24 hours last Thursday. It prompted flooding that killed a woman who was swept away and forced several people to leave their homes. Venice has been hit by the second highest tide in its recorded history. Seasonal high tides, dubbed Acqua Alta, are just 7 centimeters short of the record flood of 1966. Authorities say the tide peaked at 187 centimeters around 11 p.m. local time. Venice's historic St. Mark's Basilica, public squares and alleyways are all currently under water. Mayor Luigi Brunaro says he will declare a state of emergency and asked Rome for help. Brunaro also said the tide is a result of climate change. Flooding in Venice during this season is actually quite normal, but recent trends highlight an abnormal rise in sea levels. Now, in other news, the sea off the coast of Mexico is losing its coral at an alarming rate to a disease that has left marine biologists perplexed. More than 30% of the coastline's coral has been lost in less than a year. Now, scientists are racing to figure out a way to try and tackle the issue. More in this report.
With its turquoise sea, white sand beaches and breathtaking reds, yellows and purples of the Mesoamerican reef, the Mexican Caribbean is like no other tourist spot in the world. But these beautiful sights are on the brink of extinction. The Caribbean corals are turning sickly white from a mysterious disease that calcifies and kills them. This illness is called stony coral tissue loss disease and was first detected near the Florida coast in 2014. Researchers are desperate to understand and fight the disease. The degradation is mainly caused by population growth on islands and the effects of climate change. One prime suspect is poor water quality caused by sewage and a recent surge of decomposing sargassum seaweed. Researchers are currently building up a DNA bank of the endangered corals, hoping they can one day bring them back from the brink of extinction in the wild if needed.
With more than 1 billion chickens slaughtered in 2018, Poland has become Europe's leading poultry producer and exporter in just 10 years. But the profits at all costs approach is alarming animal rights advocates. More in this report.
These chicks may have only just hatched, but their days are already numbered, 42 to be exact. During their 6-week life cycle, their weight will increase at an astonishing rate, from just a few grams to nearly 3 kilos. Poland is Europe's leading poultry exporter. Last year, the country reared, slaughtered, and distributed more than 1 billion chickens. That's 10 times as many as a decade ago.
Our poultry doesn't just go to Europe, it also goes to the African and Asian markets, which makes Poland one of the world's market leaders.
On this farm in the north of Warsaw, 12 poultry houses are each home to 54,000 animals, meaning there are 23 chickens per square meter. Everything is automated, from the temperature of the hen house to the distribution of food and water. Each year, the farm goes through 6 chicken life cycles. Farmers acknowledge the use of antibiotics, but argue their use is carefully monitored and not systematic.
When there are problems, in the vast majority of cases, they are digestive disorders. There is no risk to the consumer.
On day 42, the chickens leave the factory for the first time and are taken to the slaughterhouse. The facility in Ujazdoek processes 750,000 chickens per day. The animals are killed, plucked, cut up, and finally packaged.
Well, I fancy a bit of chicken after that. Now, we'll be back with more news from the world of business and sports right after this short break. Hello and welcome back now to the world of business. And the State Bank of India has downgraded its GDP growth rate forecast to 4.2% in the second quarter. The decision was prompted by New Delhi's growth rate hitting a 6-year low of 5% in the first quarter. In its report, the bank rolled back its forecast for India's current GDP growth from 6.1% to just 5%. Low car sales and declining investment in construction and infrastructure led to the dip. The report said India is also significantly lower in the Economic Uncertainty Index when compared to the rest of the world. India's unemployment rate in October also rose to 8.5%, which is its highest in the last 3 years. Alibaba's application to sell $15 billion worth of new shares has been approved by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. The secondary listing would reinstate Hong Kong as the world's fundraising capital for the 7th time in 11 years. China International Capital Corporation and Credit Suisse have been appointed lead arrangers of Alibaba's Hong Kong offering. The secondary listing will bolster the capitalization of Alibaba, which is Asia's most valuable company. Alibaba already holds the world record for the largest global initial public offering in stocks. Well, staying with stocks, and the Wall Street stock market has opened lower following US President Donald Trump's threat to raise tariffs if China didn't strike a trade deal with Washington. Investors were also discouraged by escalating political unrest in Hong Kong. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has shed about 0.2%. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite have also traded about 0.33% lower. In Europe, London's FTSE 100 index also dropped 0.5% amid a decline in banking and other trade-sensitive stocks. Well, it's 21 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but don't forget, for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Bye-bye.